Thank you, Timo, for the introduction. Let's go directly into the first part of this symposium on the proteins and muscle health. This means that we have to look back to the muscles, which are usually disregarded in medical textbooks, but not by nature. Nature has given us more than 600 muscles. Most of them, this is around half of our weight, and half of that is in the lower limbs. That means that it's needed for moving. But many people are unaware that one of the three major macronutrients, which are proteins, are in muscle. And in fact, the two main functions of muscle are mobility and regulations of proteins. This means that when you discuss protein muscle disorders, you have to discuss proteins. And in fact, the muscle is in a crossroad now where the concepts and definitions are evolving. You may be aware of the last sarcopenia definition by the European Working Group, and it includes low muscle mass plus muscle function and physical performance. But if you look at the new definition, the GLIM definition of malnutrition, which has 5 elements, again, one of them is low muscle mass. And if you look at the latest definition of cachexia, which is not as recent, again, it includes a couple of criteria, but also low muscle mass. This means that when you discuss muscle mass, you're not only discussing malnutrition, but 3 different aspects of muscles. And one easy way to look at these different phases of muscles is on one side, when you have a problems in metabolic regulation and body composition, then you're talking about malnutrition. If you're talking about the mobility function, that would be sarcopenia. And if this is associated with severe disease, that may be cachexia. And of course, they are intertwined. If you look at sarcopenia categories by the European Working Group, you have a group that's called malnutrition. So that's where malnutrition and sarcopenia may coexist. But also, if you look at the part of disease, inflammatory conditions, when they are severe, they lead to cachexia. So cachexia and sarcopenia can also be together, and also with malnutrition. What happens with muscles when you age, as this is a gerontology congress? From 40 years, or perhaps starting earlier, all adults lose some muscle mass. It's around 8% per decade, but this increases rapidly after 70 years old. And the loss of muscle function is even faster. This is normative data from UK on grip strength, which is a good measure of muscle strength. And as you see, you lose it gradually starting around 30 years old. So we have built this kind of theoretical models where you have an increase of muscle when you're growing until 30 years old of age. And this is important when you have to build muscle at that age. This is different depending on the individual and also in gender. Males have more muscle than females in our species. And in adult life, you lose gradually, but this loss may be at different speeds. And at some time, it may reach a threshold to have an impact on physical performance, and later on to cause disability. And apart from diseases, the most relevant factors that impact this loss is diet and physical activity, including exercise along life. So it's not a matter only of treating problems in very old age, but to prevent problems along your adult life or the adult life of people. And this has to do with the protein dynamics in the muscle. In a stable state, muscle protein synthesis and breakdown are balanced. And at that time, you have the same muscle or a stable muscle mass. If you're able to increase the synthesis or to increase sufficiently intake, you may have muscle growth, muscle hypertrophy. But if you don't have enough intake or your breakdown is higher, then you have muscle atrophy. And we know some of the elements that regulate this. One of them, and it's not my topic today, is exercise, which may improve the balance between synthesis and breakdown. But all this evidence has led to recommendations on nutritional goals that are linked with good muscle health. The first are proteins. As we'll see, ESPEN recommends going to 1.2 or 1.5 grams per kilogram per day in people who have acute or chronic diseases, which is many older people. The usual recommendation for adults was 0.8, so this is quite much more. And something similar happens with the CO, which also mentions high-quality protein. Within these proteins, there are essential amino acids. These essential amino acids are a relevant part of the usual proteins that people are eating, but they have a specific regulation of muscle function. Essential amino acids in blends, at least in experimental research, and also leucine, also in real life, have the ability to improve muscle proteins. And again, vitamin D, at least you have to have enough vitamin D, not to have a deficit if you want to have the muscle healthy. It's not quite unclear that increasing over usual levels has any healthy effect for the muscle. This has led to two relevant papers by the PRO-AGE study group, which was based on ESPEN, and a former ESPEN expert groups. Many of the people are the same in one and the second. And they have proposed a major change in protein intake. As I said, this macronutrient had 0.8 as target for adults and older adults. But evidence shows that this is insufficient. People who become old with this intake start losing muscle and increase the risk of frailty. So the recommendation for healthy people is 30% more than that for older persons, at least over 65 to 70. And if they are sick, this increases almost 90% up. And if they are severely sick, it's up to 150% more. This is a major change in any macronutrient ever in the story of nutrition. I want to come back to essential amino acids. What's the issue? Why are they called essential? Because human body cannot synthesize them. The person needs to eat them from external sources. Other amino acids can be synthesized, and they are indispensable both for protein synthesis and thus for tissue repair and of course other functions. And they are key to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. The maximum seems with supplementation of around 50 grams of essential amino acids. This means a lot of proteins every day to have them if you don't add them separate. But people usually prefer to have the diet and only increase them artificially when they are in need, which is right. But being important, total proteins are also important. This is a recent, one of many recent studies showing that the intake, increasing the muscle intake increases muscle mass. And what's more relevant, the increase in protein intake also increases gait speed, which is a good measure of physical performance, and it's linked with mortality and other adverse outcomes. So total proteins are important. Where do they usually come from in diet and also in commercial products? They usually are derived from milk. Milk has two major parts, whey and casein. And whey seems to be very popular, but both are relevant. Both are rich in branch amino acid. Whey has more leucine, and casein has more isoleucine and valine. Whey is fast in digestion and absorption. It peaks, and it gives you a lot of amino acids immediately. Casein increases slowly, but it's more stable and remains there, as we will see. So both of them, both whey and casein, they both have essential amino acids, including branch amino acids, and they are both relevant. This is an example of how absorption is. The white boxes away. This comes very fast in your blood, but then comes down again very fast. And on the other side, casein, the black dots, increases slowly, but it remains for a longer time. So a blend of both seems to be a good way to offer protein to all the people. In fact, the most recent evidence-based recommendations for sarcopenia, which is one of the more essential indications for proteins, is a recommendation to supplement proteins added to a protein-rich diet, and also increasing calories, because nutrition is best with exercise. The ESPEN expert groups to maintain muscle health recommends to dietary protein intake and exercise. And it acknowledges that older adults need more protein. They may have decreased intake due to anorexia, drugs, and all the things, and they need to increase their intake of proteins. And you have to look at individual level. How many calories, how many proteins does this particular individual need to meet the needs? And that needs to be combined with exercise. Regular exercise avoids or limits protein breakdown and allows the body to take the proteins into the muscle when the person are eating or taking proteins. So the combination of both seems relevant. A friend of mine says that increasing intake with no exercise is promoting fatness. Increasing the exercise and diet, that's fitness. So it makes sense to think it that way. Finally, there's no large trials to date published showing how you treat sarcopenia, that is mobility, the mobility aspect of muscle mass. But very soon you'll have the results of the SPRINT-T study. The SPRINT-T study is an intervention of 2 years with a combined multimodal exercise that includes aerobic and includes strength and balance exercises, and also personalized dietary intervention, trying to increase over 1 to up to 1.2 the amount of proteins with usual diet. And I have to say, it's under embargo yet, but this is a positive trial. So in the very near future, if you look at the SPRINT, you'll find that this kind of interventions used for the muscle, including proteins and including exercise, will be the standard of care for sarcopenia and probably for malnutrition, when malnutrition has associated sarcopenia. This is all. Thank you for your attention. We'll listen now to the bone part of this story.